to start. So we're no longer off the record. Funny shit that we wanted to talk. Should have done that before, or we could do it.
I was never off the record. I've been on the record this whole time.
All right, I'm going to admit everyone. All right, look at this. Pretty good crowd. Let's do it.
Nice.
All right.
Oh my God, it's so weird. Wait, I got a pin.
Yeah, I'm going to pin me for the moment, or well, I'm going to set up the, I guess I'll spotlight me for the moment. Can I multiple pin? I don't know. I'll spotlight myself for the moment, and then I'll spotlight each of you as I introduce you.
Thanks.
So welcome to everyone coming in from the waiting room. We're really happy to have you here. I know folks are going to be kind of dribbling in here for a little while, as is the way in these events. Just as a brief reminder, it's probably a good idea you're welcome to have your screen on if you want to, but I would please ask everyone to mute unless you are asking a question out loud. We have the chat, which is all set up, so you're welcome to jump on the chat with questions or comments and appreciations, etc., at whatever point you would like to. So I will introduce myself, and I'm Ander Monson. With Will Slattery, we run Essay Daily. Will is here also as a co-host with his video off because he wants to remain incognito in the way. I'm wearing glasses because everyone else, there's Will, because everyone else on this panel has glasses. So I thought I should get out my whatever blue blocker glasses that I bought kind of for this reason. So we could similarly be spectacled as everyone else is. So as you probably know, Essay Daily is essaydaily.org. We are I guess the internet's preeminent space for conversation about the essay. We've been around for a while. Maybe there are others that are fancier than us, but we're the nicest and the coolest and probably the most fun. So you can come check us out whenever you would like at essaydaily.org. Then this is a series of salons that we started pretty early on in the pandemic as just a way of trying to get together people that we thought were interesting to have conversations and to highlight writers that we like with new books out or books forthcoming pretty soon. So our format here today will be, I'm going to ask both of our two presenters to just read briefly from their work after I introduce them, and then we'll be in conversation for the rest of the time. It's worth noting that this is being recorded with the goal of eventually publishing this as an interview and conversation on the website. So you are being recorded for the time being, and we'll also publish a stream of this after the fact for those who couldn't make it. So I'm going to start by introducing Kristine Langley Mahler, one of our two bespectacled and awesome essayists, who's a memoirist experimenting with the truth on the suburban prairie outside Omaha, Nebraska. She's the author of Curing Season, which is coming out next year from West Virginia University Press. And it's a really great book and a really exciting sort of pile of formal experiments and archives. It's really excellent. I'm really looking forward to it coming out, having published her essays and read her essays and interacted with her essays for really quite a long time. Her work, she was a recipient of a 2021 Individual Artist Fellowship from the Nebraska Arts Council, and her work is named Notable in Best American Essays 2019, and I'm sure probably in 2020, 2021, 2022, I can kind of see that happening. There's a lot of really good notable essays. Her work is published in Diagram, Ninth Letter, Brevity, Speculative Nonfiction, The Rumpus, among others. She is the director and publisher at Split Lip. Find more about her project at KristineLangleyMahler.com or at Suburban Prairie on Twitter, at least. So Kristine, I'm going to turn the spotlight to you and ask you to read a little bit.
All right. Well, thank you for that wonderful intro. Very, very kind and generous, and I am happy to be kicking this off. I'm going to read one of my shorter pieces that is in my forthcoming book with West Virginia University Press. My book's not due out until fall of 2022, so I particularly appreciate getting to talk here about Megan's book later, which is actually out basically now. But the piece I'm going to read is called In the Burn Pile Behind the Old Noble's House. Plastic Miko glass of Pocahontas Burger King promo. We entered through the kitchen, a grime-coated galley with crust-chunked plates stacked in the sink and flaking white cupboards with half-hanging doors and a formica table squeezed against the wall, and I curled up my toes in my sandals involuntarily. The effluvia of decades in the house, the damp hanging gloom of humidity because there was no central air conditioning and the painted over windows couldn't open. Down the hall was a small faded paper bedroom, and crammed between the dresser tops heaped with Looney Tunes beefy tees was the bed. That was where her mother and Trey lived. There was a deadbolt on their bedroom door. The front door was uselessly skeleton keyholed, and the back screen door was flapping, the hook and eye unlatched. 3-inch thick phone book. 2 years earlier, I had been befriended by a girl who also lived in Club Pines. When her mother remarried, the girl received a stepsister whose cleverness and willingness to engage in make-believe worlds drew me to her. I ignored the original girl and only came over on weekends to see her stepsister. She and I invented sister cities named Talasia and Lover's Lane, populating them with the families we fantasized about. Taz and Scarlett Claiborne, a movie producer and his stay-at-home wife. Kevin and Mona Faris, a paramedic and Talasia's first female mayor. Jenel and Janswood, the new 4th grade teacher. We assigned our citizens pen pals in their neighboring towns, and we would perch on the slipper chairs in the front sitting room of her stepmother's house, scribbling their get-to-know-you letters, throwing the folded papers across the carpet to each other, waiting for someone to write back. Video cassette in a padded manila envelope. We were new builds, my friend and I. My parents had upgraded from a flat ranch in Oregon to the 2-story splendor of Eastern North Carolina, and her parents had come south from New York, though they separated shortly afterward. Her mother was now living in an old white clapboard out near Aden with Trey, the son of the family who owned the fields behind my neighborhood. My friend lived with her mother during the week. As she neared the end of 8th grade, my friend became fixated on attending boarding school. She sent away for promotional materials, and I followed suit, confusing my parents as I received mailed videocassettes from the Madeira School, girls rappelling through forests in their green plaid skirts, gorgeous ivy-covered brick buildings revealing classrooms of students earnestly discussing science and math in their dormitories and dining halls. I felt I needed to purchase a history for my descendants if we were ever going to belong in the South. But I didn't want to actually leave my family behind. I wanted the labyrinth of ancestry, but I would settle for the clutched fist of ownership obtained through 9/10 of the law. Matted green shag carpet. Across from her mother and Trey's bedroom was a living room, dark and murky because I don't think there was an overhanging light fixture. The windows looked out at the shin-brushing weeds of the front yard, but the blinds stayed pulled. Too much light would heat up the room too quickly. A room air conditioner made it tolerable. A long, worn couch, an old television, and more furniture and boxes girding the perimeter. I slept somewhere in that room once, and I assume my friend slept on the couch because it was where she slept 5 times a week, but I fuzzed that night from my memory. Roach husks. Up the stairs were the 2 bedrooms no one lived in anymore. The roof needed patching, and after a good rain, streams would drip drop into the bedrooms my friend and her brother had abandoned, though their stuff was still spread everywhere. Clothes my friend had outgrown, old school projects, and the ephemera of life that she left in place. Didn't pack out in her weekend knapsack, but also didn't throw away. There was a large lawyer-looking desk with a broad leatherette ink blotter tabletop and a cunning thin brass fence standing along the back that I was instantly drawn toward. I admired the desk loudly, and my friend said I could just have it. Trey and her mother muscled the desk down the stairs, banging into the walls, and heaved it into Trey's truck bed, where my friend and I held the legs in place as they drove me back to Club Pines, the wind greasing my hair. Elsa Peretti for Halston, silver bean-shaped locket with solid perfume wax. My friend's mother and Trey had found 10 $100 bills dated to the 1920s buried inside the wall of their bedroom, a stash they assumed was from Depression days, when the nobles had owned the house. It was never clear how or why they went hammering in the walls, but their discovery convinced my friend and me that there was money squirreled away in other places. We had elaborate plans to jackhammer the stairs apart. Once her mother bought the double wide, she was angling to slide into the tired out tobacco fields alongside the house. We were going to demo the place like the Bobbsey twins, surely finding a secret not meant for us to discover. Moon pie wrappers. We did not go to boarding school. We did not carry out our plans to marry my cousin and his friend in Alabama, where it was legal if you were 13. Wednesday, Utah wrote a letter to Jenlyn Janswood informing her that Lover's Lane had burned to the ground, leaving my Talassians stranded. My friend's mother and Trey moved into the mobile home, and it was clean and fresh, a 1995 model with a vaulted ceiling and beige carpeting. Nothing like the dark, cluttered, wet history I'd wanted to burrow into. I could find aspiration anywhere. What I couldn't find was the collapsed core of a home, broken into parts I could steal. Thanks.
Nice. Thank you so much. All right. Let's switch back over here. Next up, we have Megan Culhane Galbraith, a visual writer, visual artist, adoptee, and the hero of this Zoom here today, because we're here to celebrate her book coming out. She is the author of The Guild of the Infant Savior, an adopted child's memory book, which is a hybrid memoir and essays published by Mad Creek Books, I think next week, Thursday, Friday, something like this. Her work was notable in Best American Essays 2017, and her writing and art have been published in Tupelo Quarterly, Hobart, Long Reads, Hotel America, Catapult, and Redivider, among other things. She's the Associate Director of the Bennington Writing Seminars and the founding director of the Governor's Institutes of Vermont Young Writers Institute. You can find her at megangalbraith.com, which I'll put in the chat here in a little bit. So Megan, you want to read for a little bit and then we'll chat.
Thanks so much, Ander and Kristine. That was a great reading. Thanks. It's so nice to be with all of you here. And my book comes out on Friday, and it's kind of freaking me out, but that's all right. So I'm going to read for you tonight from the first essay. And in my previous life, I was a speechwriter and communications director for a number of college presidents. And part of my job there was to write what were called talking points, which are basically the points you want someone to hit in an interview, like with NPR, with the New York Times. And so when I wrote this first essay, which sort of came out in this sort of fit of female rage, it wouldn't put me down. It just made sense because it's this sort of associative essay to call it talking points. So here's talking points. Eve, the first woman on earth, was created by God from Adam's rib. Is this where the phrase "he can't take a ribbon" comes from? Divine rules were made to be broken because she wanted knowledge, and because the serpent suggested it, and because that crisp apple looked tasty, she bit it. Then she shared a bite with Adam because she was that kind of girl. When God asked, Adam threw Eve under the bus. That was how she learned the difference between knowledge and wisdom. She was warned, she was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted. Eve spelled backwards is still Eve. A 2014 poll reported that 56% of Americans believe that Adam and Eve were real people, and 44% believe so with strong or absolute certainty. The story of Eve in the book of Genesis is similar to the story of Pandora in Greek mythology. In conceiving the world, Zeus asked Hephaestus to make Pandora out of earth and water. Pandora was created as a punishment for all mankind. In mistranslations of the origin myth, Pandora's clay jar became a box. Both are metaphors for the uterus. In the myth, Pandora opened her box filled with curses from her angry dad god Zeus, and out came death, pain, promiscuity, lies, secrets, greed, envy, loneliness, jealousy, fury, and passion. Is this where the concept of daddy issues comes from? Hope remained under the lid of the jar. Hope in a Jar is a brand name of skin cream that sells for $22 per ounce. Hope was the 146th most popular baby name for a girl in the year 2000. Its popularity has now dropped by 50%. Box is slang for lady parts, a metaphor for the uterus and vagina. Other words with metaphorical meaning for something that holds or contains include chalice, grail, jar, urn. I read that ancient Egyptians interred their fetuses and children in clay jars, which, when excavated and cracked open, resembled womb-like eggs I think of these vessels, and I think of Pandora, a woman formed from clay, a mortal woman of the earth. I think of Eve, mother of all the living, condemned to eternal pain in childbirth because of that one sinful bite. When I first met my birth mother, she told me how good she was at giving blowjobs. She said she couldn't understand why a woman on her knees gave men such a feeling of power. If you think about it, she said, you can just bite it off. Before the 1850s, the American public did not consider a fetus to be a person or abortion to be a crime. As I'm writing this, pro-life groups continue to assert that life is created at the moment of conception. The Catholic Church owns 1/6 of the hospitals in America and operates 10 of the 25 largest healthcare networks. I was treated once at a hospital called St. Mary's. The first thing the intake nurse asked me was if I was prepared to take the Lord Jesus Christ as my savior. My children are not baptized. In 2009, 5 women nearly died from prolonged and traumatic miscarriages because the Catholic hospital Mercy Health Partners had a strict ban on abortion. The definition of mercy is compassion or forgiveness shown towards someone whom it is within one's power to punish or harm. The March for Life's 2014 theme was adoption, a noble decision. Many pro-life groups use the term pro-adoption, but I am not their poster child. An ancestor of mine invented the paperboard box by accident, and with it came the advent of modern packaging. A former male boss of mine said of a colleague, a problematic woman, that he was able to just put her in a box by giving her menial tasks of no consequence. Another male boss proclaimed daily that we all needed to think outside the box. I once worked in a cubicle for 5 years. When investigators discovered H.H. Holmes, the country's first known serial killer, they found, among other things, a wooden box containing several female skeletons. He intended to sell them to a medical school. In the 19th century, illegitimate children were viewed as evidence of wrongdoing and illicit sexuality. Foundling hospitals left boxes on their doorsteps into which fallen women placed their babies. In 2017, news broke that a 100-year-old mass grave was excavated in Ireland beneath the Bon Secours mother and baby home. The remains of 800 babies and children were found in a septic tank. An accident is a euphemism for an unwanted pregnancy. As an adoptee, I think a lot about the difference between a mistake and an accident. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm gonna put all of us, try to spotlight the 3 of us at the same time. Here's my plan. There we go. That seems pretty good. All right, fantastic readings. Really appreciate the introduction to both of these really cool, formally inventive, very exciting, filled with exhibits, books. And there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about here today. One thing where we would obviously really welcome comments and questions in the chat, because we have questions for each other, but it's also a space for all of you who are here, who are not Zoom bombing us, to kind of direct us to whatever you would like us to talk about. And I guess the place that I would like to ask maybe you both to speak to, there's a lot of use of like fragments, short sections that kind of work lyrically oftentimes. Exhibits, like there's a lot of like chunks of stuff that show up in both of your books, as well as kind of like longer, much more narrative, like sort of essaying sections. And I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about how you view that raw material and how it shows up in the essays in both books. How is that like a power that sort of shows up, and how does it get incorporated? And I know we can show some screenshots and stuff like that if you want to show this off too, because like there's some really wild shit happening in both these books. So if you like weird, like visual experimental stuff, you're going to enjoy this.
That's my favorite thing when you say weird. I love the weird. I can start. I mean, for me, yeah. I know, for instance, as an adoptee, my narrative itself was very fractured. You know, like I didn't come upon information in a linear way. And I think I started writing this whole thing in some sort of linear narrative. And I quickly realized, like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And so as I got better and better at, understanding and like, it was okay to experiment, these things started falling into place. It was like this weird relief, the work just kind of presented itself. And the photos came much later. Like the whole idea of using those two together came at a much later date. And, so I think that the fragments for me are the only way I could tell this story, because like I said, it had to move back and forth in time in a really weird way, and I couldn't do it any other way. And then using the images, I came a lot to this work, frankly, through play. Like I never set out to be a visual artist. I didn't really call myself a visual artist. And I began playing in this dollhouse, like literally just because I couldn't do something on the page. And it would free me up in my head when I would play with these dolls. And like the essay, the Domicon baby essay in particular, once I started staging those archival photos in my dollhouse, I put them up in my studio at this artist residency, and I began to realize, like, not only am I playing in this dollhouse, but I'm playing at the very idea. And Kristine, I want to ask you about this too, because home is a big thing for both of us. But I'm playing in a home with the very idea, oh, thanks, Ander, of home. I'm doing exactly the domestic tasks that they were asking these women to do. So like what Ander is showing you is this, these are from my essay called Hold Me Like a Baby. And on the bottom, you'll see these archival photos that I pulled out of at Cornell. There was a program called Domestic Economics, and it was started in 1919. And it was a scientific degree program that taught women basically how to do housework and be mothers. But what they did is, part of motherhood, of course, is having a baby. So where do you get these babies? Well, they contracted them from local foundling homes and used these babies as practice babies, which they then adopted out after, I don't know, 6 months to a year. So about 6 to 8 women at a time would mother these babies. And when I uncovered these images, I just came back in my dollhouse and realized, God, my dollhouse looks very easily the same background and this and that. And the juxtaposition was just so dystopian that it really complemented the narrative of adoption, which has a really dark underbelly. So I'll stop talking now, but Kristine, I'm really interested how you were talking about home and making sense of that, because I think that's a lot of where I am coming from too, in this idea of play, especially in a dollhouse, which is very home oriented.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, I can't wait to come back and talk more about the visuals in your book, because I just adore them, and especially the use of archival like evidence, which is what I guess I want to talk about to talk about why kind of what I'm doing with fragments and artifacts in mind. So my book is about a county that I lived in for 4 years, basically pre-adolescence, age 10 to 14, which is to say 5th grade through 8th grade, a wonderful time in anybody's life, but it's particularly difficult when it's Pitt County, North Carolina, and I had no Southern reference at that point. My parents are from Northern Minnesota. I had moved there from Oregon. So it's kind of, it's an awkward time to be a teen, but it's also an awkward time to enter a completely different everything, different landscape, different social rules, different accents, hard things to kind of put together. So that's kind of the framework of what my book is looking at, entering this space that is supposed to be my home and that I was ready to start claiming as home, that didn't really, that I never really felt at home in, though I very, very, very badly wanted to. So in researching my childhood, like for me, it takes artifacts. Fortunately, I saved a ton of them. We moved 3 significant times when I was growing up. And each time I lost more artifacts, but I simultaneously hoarded the more recent ones. So like I've got a ton from high school now, which is when I got the most grabby. I realized what was gone. So I have a lot of physical things from then, and I have very few from my childhood. And I think that it's the lack of having physical artifacts that kind of kept me digging for more. And instead, facts became my artifacts, memories became my artifacts, and I just kind of like rubbed the neural pathways into canyons to kind of keep those facts, to turn them into something that I could see and make visual. So for me, fragments kind of look like artifacts on the page. And since my book project is very much, it's a collection of objects, of talismans, of amulets that I kind of turned into essays, and then, I guess I kind of am presenting them to the reader as well as myself as the narrator as a proof of being and existence there. The most important thing to the narrator in my book isn't to be liked, but it's to be witnessed and acknowledged, which is why she's continually presenting throughout all those essays to herself, as well as to the reader. I'm not really sure anymore, this evidence of existence. So, I mean, that, you know, there's a particular essay I have in there called Shadow Box that looks like a bunch of boxes. There's sections are in boxes. I think, Ander, you might have the thing you can pull up for Shadow Box. And so I've got the narrative going for a while, but then I also inside, I kind of create a visual shadow box there with presenting the experiences as those, as the items in there. So I don't have the fake joint that I referenced there. I don't have a picture of the chalkboard that I was doing the initials on. I don't have the letter that I wrote, fortunately. I actually don't think I have it anymore, but I have the memory of them and I have the experience. And so by putting them in the box, in a shadow box on the page for people, I'm trying to still, I guess, kind of show how a memory can be turned into an object, which can be placed inside an essay and embodied in an essay. So to go back to, just to talk about fragments in general, I mean, like whether it's in that or elsewhere, and, in the essay that you read, Megan, which is it's separated, there's space between each of those sentences you were saying. It's each one of them can be seen as, it's an artifact. And kind of you too, I think, in your book are kind of putting together a collection of evidence, basically.
I totally agree with that. And what you said about a lack of objects as a child, like for me, it was a lack of photographs. I mean, I was adopted at almost 6 months old. So going through my baby book, I was like, I put it together only after looking at the baby book, thinking, I don't have any newborn photos of me. There are no photos. It's like I sprang fully formed as a toddler with like teeth onto my mother's lap, So I think recreating those photos was important to me for my narrative, for just what you said, like that lack, that sort of erasure that exists around. So thanks, Ander. Like this is, and I started doing this again to the idea of play. Like when I started trying to configure what I wanted to put in terms of my friend Walter said, you should structure this as a baby book. And I went through it took me a long time to figure out how to do that. And drawing, like when I came home and I couldn't figure out how to, like, structure to me was like formal structure. Like I need to rearrange the words on the page. But I came home and I started I opened my baby book, which is right here on the right, and I started drawing these little elements that you see in the book. And all of a sudden, I just had this epiphany, like, oh, wait, the images can be of the baby book. That can be the structure. And so this collage is like the frontispiece. I like to use that word because I didn't know what it meant before. It sounds like, I was like, it's like cod piece or something. It's the frontispiece of the book. But it's literally, a collage of things from my baby book, including like that piece of hair. is like in everyone's baby book, right? It's a little lock of hair when you're first, and I really literally thought of like cutting a piece of my own hair and putting it on there, but that's a doll wig. But that's how I came to kind of the how to structure this as somewhat like a baby book. And it was simply through kind of drawing and sketching and looking in my baby book for what was missing. And it turned out there was a lot that was missing.
Well, if I can ask you, Megan, if I can start asking her questions, because I'd love to start asking questions. Well, I mean, speaking of, the things you did have, the photographs that you do have, that you in Megan's book, at the beginning and end of chapters, there at the end of the chapter is a real photo, a photograph, and then at the beginning is a created image that you made with dolls to simulate the photograph that's at the back. And so I'm really interested in the process and the idea behind taking an image and what recreating it does to memory, what it does to the creation of memory, what it does to the recreation of memory, and what it does to the reclamation of both fact and memory.
Yeah. Ander, I wonder if you could pull up, there's one in there that's pretty much, it's like me on my little foot mat.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I don't know why this is my favorite, but this was literally my nap mat when I was in preschool. It's like a giant green foot. But, I think like we play with what we don't understand. So like, I think recreating these images of me in of my baby book photos in the dollhouse gave me a way of looking at myself again. Photograph is it's an object in and of itself. It's a way of being frozen in time. So it let me into a place where I could kind of go back in time and think about what was missing, who I was, why was I, I was the first child, I was the firstborn child. So there's a lot of photos of me, as for my siblings, as you get to like the third child, there aren't that many photos, but here I was too, kind of like a doll myself. I mean, I'm sitting there, being the subject of the photo is also being the object in many ways. And so I wanted to play with that idea. And I really got this idea from doing it in that Domicon essay. The idea, it came to me all of a sudden. I was working really hard trying to think about how to, originally I'd had photos just from my dollhouse visual art project in there, and they just weren't working correctly. And then I was like, oh, there it is right there in front of my eyes. I can do something similar to what I did with those Domicon babies. And the fact of the matter is, like in that Domicon essay, I mean, I draw a lot of parallels between them and between myself as an adoptee. And I think it made it like further dystopian. It made the whole idea of like what I was writing about even more dystopian. And the idea that I would front each essay with a dollhouse photo, and then at the end, as almost like an artifact, a little archive. At first, I had this whole idea conceived that there would just be a front piece to the essay, and then at the very back of the book would be the archive of all these photos. But then it was April Bernard who I was talking with about this, and she's like, well, what if you do this, or there's an archival thing where you put it at the end of the essay? And I was like, again, my head blew off. I was like, oh, I didn't even think of that. And so putting them in this little tiny frame and making that something that was consistent throughout, kind of really added that visual element I really kind of like it. They did a great job in the book too. I will say that Ohio State University Press like committed to doing these in color was really important to me. Like the color and the black and white, they are that way. If the original photo was black and white, then I wanted to replicate it in black and white as well. But the color is not something cheap to print. So I'm glad they made that effort.
I think one thing that's really interesting about like also like restaging these photographs, and I mean, is like it gives the eye of the book like something to do like in the present tense that I think is really important when like writing from memory. Like it's very easy to kind of like just like be spinning in memory and like going around in the past. And it gives us like that, like an active thing to be doing in the moment. That's, well, I mean, archiving is one, right? Another is like sort of representing on the page, either in a really mimetic way. I'm just scanning the thing that I have, or I'm describing the thing that I have. And it's really fascinating to me that then that is a big part of like, it wasn't part of like the initial thing you were doing with the essays, but it was like the secondary thing, this other layer that like kind of really starts to bring the book together. And I guess I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit more about that aspect of it. I mean, what did it do to the book? Um, I mean, for me, it really makes the book like pop as like a book and less of like a collection of stuff that's kind of in it.
Yeah. I don't know. It's funny. Like I honestly, like with my art making, I didn't think that hard about it. But it was like, it always had to be there. It just, it couldn't, they were not mutually exclusive. Like I could not have written this without the images. And, you know, again, like it took me a while to struggle to figure out what those images were, what, you know, I knew they would, and I don't know, it's hard to explain, honestly. It's just like, they just could not exist one without the other. And I think there's this weird, what's the theory? It's like, some, you know, where the eye kind of fills in things for you. Is that Gestalt, like where you know, it's another way of filling in information for the reader in a fragmented way that people get. You know, I don't have to over explain something, but yet it works still. And so that was a terrible answer, but
Well, there's a question in the chat. There's actually several questions in there. And one of them is sort of thinking, I'm just going to read Aaron's question, that I'm thinking about the Eve Pandora passage and wondering about how religion and mythology maybe fills in the gaps of what we don't know. And a lot of what we're talking about here is like how to kind of create gaps and like what you want the reader to do with those gaps, perhaps. And is that maybe an idea Megan plays with in the book? And I'm curious whether that is something Kristine thinks about with regard to creative nonfiction. Big questions.
Oh, Kristine, did you want to go? I think those gaps are really important. And I think that, you know, erasure is a big thing in my book, right? So the idea of being an adoptee, not having information, I think how we mythologize our own narratives, you know, the idea of sort of the meta narrative of memory, of memory itself, was something I wanted to convey in this book. So I hope that it reads as like a meditation on memory itself. And so I think that Eve, let's see, I mean, we mythologize our narratives to suit our story. And especially as women, some of those narratives they're formed by the male gaze. I was very interested in thinking about that. And my birth mother, for instance, mythologized her narrative. So I wanted to play on that idea by creating a number of essays that also did that same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I am fascinated by the mythologizing of narratives. I feel like it's what I spend a lot of my work trying to do, is taking truth and then trying to pick it apart and throw things at it and see what sticks and see what gets changed when you add a new element to it and everything. And I mean, if you could pull up, I have a picture on there from some of the image work I did. I'm looking for the home purchase picture. Which, yeah, that one right there. Right there. Yep, that's my mom right there. But you wouldn't know that, and that's what I guess I want to talk about, is that, I mean, I think that it's that when you're using images in your books, you're creating the space for people to fill in kind of what they want to think. And yet, you know, with this, I've got, you know, a quote from the county history book, which I spend a lot of time deconstructing and laying my own stuff on top of, which is kind of what I've done here. That's a photo of my mom and my house, and it's a quote from somebody else's family history that that happened to actually be mentioning Langley Hall, which is, you know, my maiden name. That was the, you know, that's my family's house, though it's not. And so what I think is fascinating is that I'm telling you, this is a photo of my family. See how, I mean, you'll see this through here, but frankly, this photo could be from anywhere. And the narrator is presenting them like it's this really obvious proof, but unless the reader is actually familiar with these places or the landscape of Pitt County, then like the images could be falsified. I mean, they're not, which, you know, it has to be clear to the reader by the time they get to this point in my book, because the narrator's been insisting that she like totally belongs here. But as a writer, I like the idea of kind of leaving that space and that question and that uncertainty for the reader to kind of be telling the narrator, you know what, like, I don't necessarily believe you. You want this so badly, but it might not be true.
I mean, it sounds like you're sort of creating like an unreliable narrator in creative nonfiction, which of course they always are, right? I mean, we can't trust any self fully to be able to, you know, I mean, we're always like performing something when we're writing ourselves, which is partially why it's so interesting to write ourselves, is that it's always like some version of the self that we are playing or we're kind of creating. There's a question in the chat from Deanna Delgado. Do you try out different forms before landing on the ones used in your book? And did you do anything strategic to organize the work to make it easier for you to edit and revise? And I would just sort of, I guess, add like, this is the thing I was thinking about a lot with your book, Kristine, like that, because there's a lot of different forms in that one, but they start to repeat after a while. So we start to get like, they're related and then the forms kind of repeat, which helps to kind of like feel us, once we learn how to read it in one essay, then we kind of know when it comes back up again. And I guess like, so the question is like, yeah, I mean, what was your strategy in like trying out forms or like rejecting forms or just repeating forms in either book?
Well, I mean, for my book, you know, the essays were written discreetly, ETE, so they were really not necessarily intended to lay next to each other. I didn't have a master plan in mind. In fact, I was writing toward an entirely different book when I realized that like the heart matter that it needed to keep coming back to, if I bound these together, I could see a better narrative coming through. So when I started laying them together, I noticed that all the ones that are dealing with the subject matter of Pitt County and of, you know, displacement and girlhood trauma they were all very sectioned off like that. And so I thought about, okay, let me see how I can, you know, when structuring them in the book in the order to go in the right order and everything, you know, you don't want too many things next to each other that look exactly identical. And yet there's also, like you're saying, there's a strength that comes from seeing something repeat, particularly in a book like that, where the narrator keeps repeating over and over to the reader, like, please, you have to believe me. See, I'm showing you all of these things. Here's an object and I'm telling you, and then here's another object and it's a memory and I'm showing you. And so I think that for me, repeating form was important, but when I was creating them, it definitely wasn't with a unified theory in mind. They came together because of their unity, not by my writerly design.
Yeah, for me, I think, like I said, I started trying to write this thing like a linear narrative, and I just, failed terribly. But there are pieces in the book, like I feel like truth is just stranger than fiction. So I remember trying to write this essay I have. It's called Other Names for Home, which wound up being what I guess is a prose poem, whatever that is. But in that, what I started with was research, and I researched all the names in like 19th century New York of these foundling homes, homes for unwed mothers. And I was sort of shocked at how terrible these names seemed. And I began writing the essay straight on in a linear way, and it just was not working. And then I realized I could just strip the thing down like to its chassis and curate the names to stand by themselves. I mean, like American Female Guardian Society and Home for the Friendless, Society for the Relief of Respectable Aged Indigent Females, Sorrowful Mother Home. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And I was talking to my friend Haley, who runs the Adoptees On podcast, and she said her friend had read my book and was like, I'm surprised there isn't a home named Blood of the Guilty Slut Whore Mary. So I was so fascinated by trying so hard to do something and then realizing it's just there right in front of me, and I think I struggled also with this essay where I was trying to write the story of the demise of my marriage, of my divorce. And that shows up in the form of a fairy tale. And I struggled with that thing for like a month. And probably the last week that I was writing it, all of a sudden I just thought to myself, this is not working, it's not working, it's not working. And all of a sudden I said, once upon a time. So like subverting that trope of the fairy tale by telling the story of something that a failed marriage in a fairy tale suddenly there was a strength to that, and suddenly like I could bring in things like the psychological ideas of the false self versus the true self, and and it just opened up everything for that piece, which probably would not have been in there because it was just otherwise going to be whiny and stupid.
So I'm hearing you find you're trying different keys to a lock that you don't quite know what's behind it. And then when you unlock it, you find the right one, it kind of works. I mean, were there any that you just really wanted to have work, but you couldn't get to go, or couldn't find the right lock maybe for the key that you had?
Yeah, those are also the ones that are on the cutting room floor. I'm not showing those to anybody. No, there's a lot that actually, I don't know about you, Kristine, but there was a whole section in my original manuscript. It went pretty far. I had what was called the subtexts, and they were these it was probably 10,000 words of what I guess now I would call flash stuff. I was reading Marianne Winnick at the time, like the Glen Rock Book of the Dead. So I was trying to emulate her style by doing this kind of cool thing inside the narrative. And my friend Jay read it and he was like, I'm sorry, honey, but you're going to have to take all this out. It's not working. And I really still like those pieces and I'd like to go back to them, but none of that stuff made it into this book. So anyway, what didn't make it into yours?
Well, I mean, I think mainly there's a lot of retreading in my book, retreading the same things, as any nonfiction writer does. You have your subjects you come back to over and over. And so I had a couple of essays that I just really loved. They were so good. And I knew they were totally going to fit in this, but they were completely covering the same material, to an extended way. I mean, one of them was called The Things I Learned about being in the South. And it's every single thing that I mentioned in there, with the exception of maybe two, I covered in greater detail and better in a different essay. And it was okay, while I thought it looked really cool to see a list, and I was it was a way of I'm going to show you what I'm about to tell you. It was too much. It was not necessary. And so, I mean, I think that, for me, it was having to find a place where I was saying, I have covered that already. This might be a great essay. You might find a cool form for it, but that's got to live outside of the book because it's too much. It's just too much on the same point.
I mean, I did different things like with my, I wanted to, toward the end of my book, you know, I go into like this whole section on female desire, like exploring desire from my birth mother's perspective in the 60s, you know, to how she was sort of chastised for, you know, basically coming into puberty and just, she just got caught out, you know, getting pregnant, to my own feelings about that. And so this is like adult Megan looking back at what a power she, you know, didn't know she had. And I stumbled upon in my research rabbit hole this idea of erotic pocket watches, because I wanted to know what kind of pocket watch this wealthy industrialist, you know, of ancestor of mine had carried. And so lo and behold, yeah, there are erotic pocket watches, and they're freaking interesting and sexy and cool. But like that can lead into like examination of pockets, why women don't have pockets. You know, it led me down this great rabbit hole to explore the idea of desire and shame. And so looking at some things in this, you know, a very prismatic way throughout the book, throughout both of our books, you know, I want to pick up a stone and turn it over, and then, you know, pick up another one and turn it over, like what's under there, what's over here, and maybe looking at very similar things, but from all these different perspectives. And, you know, and I think I want to talk about research too, because we both have done a lot of research, you know, and how do you feel about it? Because there's so much that I left out that I'm like, I could drop some knowledge bombs on you guys about it. You know, it's like we can have drinks and talk about XYZ, like 19th century foundling practices, but that stuff, you know, the reader is just going to be like, given the shark eyes, like boring. I can't. So what did you leave out of yours?
Oh, I mean, like I feel like I didn't leave very much out, because it was kind of the point. Like, I mean, I kept forcing the reader to look at the research that I was doing, to like it, because I wanted them to trust the narrator is like, I'm leaving no stone unturned. I'm going to show you how I understand this county maybe better than some of you do. And trust me, I can give you the receipts to make you see that, like, I did my work on this. Not only did I live there, so I actually, like, you know, experienced some of it, but also I totally understand the history now. So for me, I felt like I really was putting as much research on the page to make the reader see it, which, you know, it's kind of harkening back to an older form of not the nonfiction genre. I mean, like, I know we've got some people in here who are going, hey, wait a minute, I thought you guys were going to talk about what genre got to do with it, which we are talking about what genre got to do with it. But like, I feel like for a long time, nonfiction was seen solely as, it was either journalism, or it was, I mean, if people want to think of it as like the diary realm, or just very traditional essays that were not broken up into sections at all. And I feel like both of our books and the essays within our books are pushing out on that and saying, you can have that. Absolutely. I'm going to put all of that in this book. Watch me do it. But the genre can fit it all. I don't have to commit to only one form that is going to make it look unified. I can do it all, not because I can do it all, but because the genre holds it all, I guess, is what I want to say. So, you know, that's a long-winded way of saying, like, my research is all there and I basically throw it all there, but that's because it's needed for that narrator in the book. You know, your research is different, Megan, because you have like the whole history of adoption that you're contending. I mean, like, you know, you could go for forever if you were throwing in all the information that you've learned about adoption, but then you bring it into the personal with yours, and so you have to, I don't know, you found a good way to calibrate between putting the research there so that people can see that it's founded on not just your own experience, but also that it's founded on your experience.
Yeah, I think actually I was kind of scared to put all that research out there, because when I was doing it, it felt like I was doing it in a vacuum, and I was coming to these conclusions, and I'm like, it can't be just me seeing this, right? It can't be just me seeing this, but I really had no other touchstone. I didn't know of other books necessarily that were writing about this until I read American Baby by Gabrielle Glaser. And honest to God, like I read that and we were both doing our research in parallel. And her book was so affirming and validating. I mean, we used similar research like the Harlow's monkeys and, you know, all those experiments they did on babies in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And I'm like, oh, good. Someone sees this as really fucked up. You know, it's not just me. But when you're doing that stuff in a vacuum, it's like, especially coming from the mindset of an adoptee who for me, this book is me using my voice for the first time about adoption for the first time. And that's terrifying. So to have the ballast of a book like American Baby, that is, she's a journalist. I'm a journalist by training. It's so well researched. To have that ballast going forward with mine, I was like, oh, I sort of relaxed into mine. I was like, okay, I'm not the only one who sees this.
Well, and when we get to talk about you using your voice, it brings up another point that I wanted to say earlier when we were talking about the images, which is those amazing images that say permission not granted that you put in your book. You've got the ones that you're making with the dolls and the originals, and then you also have ones where you just have to put permission not granted. And so I think this is the opportunity to talk about, like, in the nonfiction genre, like, let's talk about permission and the shaping of narratives that have to happen based on the fact that, like, we're calling this nonfiction. And so sometimes that means you have to hide or remove or obscure truth in one way or another so that you can protect either the rights or the anger or the responses of people who also experience that with you, but who need to, like, who don't necessarily want it out there.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting story. My birth mother, very late in the game, decided that she wanted to remain anonymous. So I changed her name in the book, but 3 of the photos that I'd asked permission to use, she would not give me permission to use those unless she could read, revise, and change my manuscript based on her expectations. And that wasn't going to happen. This is my story, and I get to tell it the way that I get to tell it. And I was very respectful, but it presented a challenge, right? And so after I got over the deep hurt of what had happened of her basically erasing herself from the narrative at a very late date, it became an artistic challenge. And at first my editors were like, well, you just don't have to have photos there. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. I want to have something there. So I took that frame. I think, Ander, I have that image of it. Yeah. I took the frame that was referenced in the book. It's a little silver photo frame. And I put a little piece of white flannel in there to represent a baby blanket. And I just put permission not granted. And one of these photos, like this dollhouse reenactment, is a photo that she did not give me permission to use that was of our reunion. And I think that further shows visually the idea of erasure. It underscores the idea of adoption and erasure, and so. But permission, I think that the permissions that I was being asked to make were like they're about the photos. Like, can I use this photo of you? It's not like the press asking me, I need to get permission from everybody to write my story. But it just became very, very sticky. And my birth mother had said she would be my open book, so it was even harder because of that. But anyway, It did provide a very interesting artistic challenge. And like I said, I feel like it succeeded. Sadly, made the narrative stronger.
Yeah, I mean, it adds like another level to it. Like the absence of the thing is very powerful in the book. And that's like also like, I mean, you know, like a strategic gap, like that is a function of, you know, trying to be true to people's wishes and writing this as nonfiction, like whatever that means. Like whatever, I mean, like one option is like, well, fuck it, I'm just gonna fudge it, or go forward without it. Another is like, well, okay, it's a limitation, but it's a limitation that kind of moves you in a different direction and actually adds power to the manuscript, which is really valuable and something that I think like nonfiction gets to do. Like we have to do it. And if we like give up on having to do it, then it makes things easier maybe in the moment, but then like you don't have to see what happens when you have to contort your way around that and solve the problem. That's a gift and a responsibility, I guess.
Yeah, it's I mean, I love working with those kinds of constrictions. And like I said, I was really happy after I got over the hurt that it could become, you know, I mean, grief and pain, this is, you know, making art out of that, what we don't understand or what we can't have.
So as I mentioned in the chat, we're over the 1 hour mark. I'm happy to go for a little bit longer, but I think maybe we can take one of the questions from the chat. One of the outcomes from this is, as I mentioned to our panelists, is I would like to kind of continue talking about some of these threads that have shown up. So we're going to probably try to do that over email and then post it on Essay Daily at some later point. So if you have other questions that like we don't actually have time to quite get to right now, but you'd like the panelists to talk about, you may either email me, I'm just ander@thediagram.com, or put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them a little bit later. But I guess to come back to Joanna's question about genre, which I think is maybe a nice ending point or opportunity to end for the moment, is to think about like, were there books about genre or books that like illuminated, or essays about genre or something that illuminated some aspect of the genres that in which you were working while you were working on them? Like what that gave you permission or kind of changed the way that you were thinking about how these books came out in the end? I don't know if that is the case for either one of you, but if so, I think people would really love to hear what those are.
Oh, I mean, I have like a huge list. I like made this huge list of all these books that were super formative for me. But I mean, the one I guess I want to mention most because it just blew my head off is B.J. Holler's Dispatches from the Drownings, which is one of the most incredible genre-bending books I've ever seen. So what he did is he took 100 accounts of river drownings along the Chippewa River in Wisconsin, and he juxtaposed them with photographs from Charles Van Schaik, who was a photographer in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So the photos aren't of the exact things being pictured, but they are of the same era and the same location. But the best part about it is that out of the 100 stories that he told, 25 of them were falsified, but he didn't tell you which ones. And he said, I'm not going to tell you which ones. And he even created like a whole fake thing in the back, so, like an index, so that, you know, I guess if you really wanted to do the work, you could find out what was real and what was not. But otherwise, it was kind of, it just opened up the space to think about telling the truth, I guess, when you're working with artifacts. And the thought of being able to do that. I mean, I am very strictly true in my books and in my essays because I really feel like I need to be as true as I can be. But the thought of maybe not exactly being fully true and making people have that same question that I kind of have, just that book, it was amazing. So it was not directly formative on my book, but it was completely formative on the idea of stretching the genre of nonfiction and the definition of nonfiction.
I can go in a completely different direction because I'm a weirdo, but one of the most formative books of my childhood, and it informed this book, is, and I have it right here because it's my favorite book, The Lonely Doll. And this book was called like the creepiest children's book by the New Yorker, which I find completely dumb. But it's, I mean, here, if you look, like, here is, I love the spare words. I love that their images. The images do so much work in here. There's not many words, right? So it's like, and this is, if you read about Dare Wright, who wrote this book, I mean, this is wholly autobiographical. This is her reenacting her life through these dolls. This is her feeling lonely as a girl because she's, you know, her parents are like never around. And in this like controversial spanking scene, I wrote an essay about this. I'm still trying to place somewhere, but I mean, this controversial spanking scene, she's not even the one that's getting in trouble. She's being spanked for having a feeling, right? She's a little girl who has a feeling and she's getting spanked for it, for something Little Bear did, the little fucker, and not even, you know. But this, I think, for me, it's just, this is so much informs my book. And I kept going back to this while I was trying to figure out how to make my book work. And I just can't say enough about it. And especially the first one, like, you know, all the sequels aren't as good as the first one, but there's a whole series of them. And I spent hours as a kid just curled up on the couch looking into those photographs like they were just little dioramas that I could not get enough of.
I can't believe there's a sequel to that there are sequels. Did you say that? Like there's multiple sequels?
There's multiples. There's like the Lonely Doll, then there's the Lonely Doll, you know, it's all like her and the two bears and they go out and have shenanigans. And the first one is just perfect. I think it's the most perfect book. And it deals with, like most children's books do, they deal with enormous weighty issues. And that's another thing, like to be able to do that with words and pictures is just fascinating to me.
That's fantastic. I think we will close on that point, and I may ask you both to elaborate a little bit on those books in our, to be posted later on Essay Daily, a little longer conversation. There's a lot of other stuff that I would love to talk about with these books. But in the meantime, I think you should go ahead and order Megan's book if you've not already. It comes out on Friday. It is fantastic. Oh yes, there we go. And once Kristine's book is available for order, we will all then duly go pre-order that one too. So a round of applause for our readers here tonight, which you're getting a little bit spastically in my background. And a thank you to all of us who came to talk about these really interesting questions that have been very fun to engage with. And I really appreciate both of you and your work and your talking about that here tonight. So thank you.
Thank you for having us. And thank you for wearing your glasses.
Thank you so much, Ander and Kristine. It's just really been an honor.
Yeah, a pleasure. And we'll post the link to this for those who missed it, which is a lot of folks tonight also. So you can catch up later if you want to revisit these conversations and our cool glasses, of which I'm the least cool of the three by far.
Yeah, I have to put my good ones back on.
Yes.
Those are the ones I can see.
Those
are the ones I can see with. These are the ones I can't see the computer with.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Everyone have a good evening, night, wherever you are. And we'll see you hopefully at our next Salon, which will be probably in about a month or so. We're working on that, what the next one will be. So come and join us again and find us at essaydaily.org.
Thank you.
Thank you.